So here I am. All right, I'll back up a little bit because you can't drive. So I backed up, and she goes past me. She's like, lady, give me a break.
Not good. You might want
Shaq's a veteran podcast.
Did you spit out your gum already?
Yeah, nope.
Okay. There's a trash right there.
I just stuck up for you. Make me look like a dope.
On a podcast?
We're going to hear it.
I thought you chewed gum, and if you cough straight into the mic, right?
All right.
And cup it.
Yeah, you got it.
That was really quick.
That's right.
I thought chewing gum would help the situation.
Yeah, I did too, but I guess not.
Welcome to the Lancaster Patriot Podcast. My name is Chris Hume. Thank you for joining me today. I have three very special guests. To my left, Matt Kenitzer, pastor of St. John's Reformed Church. Matt, thanks for being here.
Yeah, good to be with you again.
To my far right, Pastor Joel Saint, pastor of Independence Reformed Bible Church. Joel, thanks for coming in.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
And a first-time guest to the Lancaster Patriot Podcast, Shak Khoury. That's right?
That is right, Chris.
Okay. I usually call you Shak. I used to pronounce your name wrong. I pronounced it Curry. And for the longest time, I pronounced your name Curry.
Yeah, it's not Indian food.
Yeah, you're not Indian. Where are you from, Shak?
I am from the country of Israel. Some call it Palestine, depending on where you live. But that's where I grew up, in the West Bank. So it would be Palestine where I grew up.
Okay. And you are the co-host of the world-famous podcast, Crossover Sports, right?
Yes.
Yeah, with a severe handicap with your co-host there.
My co-host is a mess.
Right, yeah. So check out Shak's...
But you're working at it. You're trying to help him.
Yes.
Good.
Yeah. Check out Shak's podcast, Crossover Sports, right?
That's right.
Okay. All right, today we want to talk about a few things. First thing, we want to talk about this Muslim holiday that some Pennsylvania state representatives have voted on. Shak, how do you say this holiday?
Eid al-Fitr, which comes right after Ramadan.
Okay, Eid al-Fitr. So do you know what the holiday is about?
Well, it means the festival or the feast of breakfast or eating, pretty much. So it comes after Ramadan because they
Don't we already have that every day around here? Festival of eating?
I guess. I don't know.
What do we need a Muslim holiday for?
So this bill, it's House Bill 1752, and most of the people who voted for it were Democrats. But there were some Republicans who voted for it, including Tom Jones. And this bill, if it passes and becomes law, I think it's somewhere in some Senate committee, would make this Muslim holiday an official state holiday in Pennsylvania. Now, some people might say, well, that's not that big a deal, whatever, it's just a holiday. But we've spoken before about this issue of the magistrates recognizing Christ or despising him, really. And I think that's what we have going on here. So, Matt, what are your initial thoughts on these representatives saying, yeah, let's publicly acknowledge the religion of Islam?
Well, one, you just mentioned that to recognize Christ. I thought it was a requirement way back in our history, especially in Pennsylvania, that you were required to recognize that the Bible was God's word and to recognize and have faith in the Lord Jesus Christ. And that was a requirement to hold that public office. And so it just kind of shows the deterioration of our society into a lot of what we talked about before, of pluralism, this going into this kind of humanistic, secularistic, pluralistic society where that's no longer a requirement. And I was just thinking on my way down there, just trying to kind of think about why did this happen? And I think that's one of a main situation, is that you don't have the requirement of someone to be a Christian holding that public office. And when you don't have that, then there's kind of a natural downgrade into giving into something like this. So that's a fundamental area that I think needs to be kind of thought about and addressed. And obviously that would bring up, but you expect this to be a Christian nation. You expect it to be adherence to God's law, all of that, which, Christians don't want to talk about, don't want to deal with, don't know what to do with right now. And that's a problem, because then when you give in to, when this happens, these leaders are leading the society, and especially the Christian community, into a syncretistic society where they're mixing godlessness with supposed godliness. And that's, a recipe for all types of problems.
So this Democratic representative, Tariq Khan, from Philadelphia County, he said that William Penn, our Commonwealth's founder, was an advocate for democracy and religious freedom, and Penn was known for his ability to build community with people that were of different faiths. So he's appealing to William Penn as justification for the public celebration, public recognition of this Muslim holiday. Of course, William Penn would have had nothing to do with this.
Right.
William Penn was about religious freedom within the context of the Christian religion. Yeah. The laws he passed, you mentioned the original Constitution of Pennsylvania, I think you were referring to that, which required you to acknowledge Christ and the Scriptures. His preamble to William Penn's great law says that his goal was to make and establish such laws as shall best preserve true Christian and civil liberty in opposition to all unchristian, licentious, and unjust practices. The statutes also required members of the Commonwealth government, as you said, to profess and declare they believe in Jesus Christ to be the Son of God, the Savior of the world. So now this guy Khan also said that if we would officially recognize Eid el-Fitr, is that how you say it?
Close enough.
Close enough. It would be a testament to the growth of the U.S. as a multi-faith and multicultural country.
I remember back when I was living in Maryland, and there was this planned community. Of course, everybody's going to be real happy. It was really planned from the bottom up, right? And they didn't have any churches. They just had an interfaith center. And then anybody could use it, and we were just all going to be so happy. I wonder how that would work out in a mosque if you put up a cross. What do you think, Shak?
It wouldn't work.
Yeah.
Not at all.
Okay, so we've spoken this when the Lancaster County Commissioners acknowledged this Hindu holiday here in Lancaster County, and I think in their mind it's like, well, no big deal, right? We're just, there's no consequence to publicly recognizing a false religion. And that goes to the heart of this. And that's really what this is about. Our nation is either going to honor Christ or dishonor him, and you can't honor Christ by publicly recognizing false religions. I mean, let's just briefly talk about Islam. Shak, you spent some time in the Middle East, right? I mean, now I know there are many people who would say, hey, they're Muslim, but they're not. Are they being consistent with the Quran? Are they promoting what the Quran is promoting? Are they promoting what Muhammad promoted? Is the Muslim religion going to bring about justice and prosperity in society? Because really that's what this is about in the end. Is it the Christian religion that will bring about prosperity? Or can you take that or leave it, just throw all the religions in there, and they all produce the same thing in society?
Yeah, absolutely not. And we have to call it what it is. It's idolatry. You're worshiping a false god. He is not the God of the Bible. It's idolatry. And there's not much that God hates more than idolatry. I mean, it's one of the top ones that he hates. And we can't, as a Christian nation or a church, accept even a feast. And when the kings in the Old Testaments, didn't destroy the temples of the Baals and destroy their feasts, it was not a good thing. They were not doing a good thing. And acknowledging a feast that is to glorify a false god and a false religion is idolatry. And that's what it is. We have to call it what it is. And talking about Islam, no, they will not bring peace or justice, and no other religion will, other than the religion of Christ and Christianity.
Yeah, I have a question about that, Shak, about Islam in general. I noticed that when you have refugees from one Islamic country, maybe you can help me out with this. I noticed that when you have refugees from one Islamic country to another, I noticed that they never, or they don't go to another. There's plenty of Islamic countries there in the Middle East. I never hear of refugees going from one Islamic nation to another. It's simply like they always help me. Tell me if I'm wrong here.
You're absolutely
go to a Christian nation or a historically Christian nation. They're apostate now.
Yeah,
but a historically Christian nation every time. I mean, if Islam is so great, why can't they just go from one to the other? And then just tell us, hey, Islam is failing here in nation X. We're going to go over to nation Y where it's succeeding, and I never see it. Am I just missing it? What's going on?
No, you're absolutely right. And talk about current events. What's going on in Gaza right now? All the refugees leave there. They won't go to Egypt, really. No one wants to stay in Egypt.
Well, they should go to Egypt. They border Egypt.
What an
they
absolute
could.
mess, you know. They could.
Yeah.
Yes. They go to Turkey, but they don't stay in Turkey either.
Oh, why not Turkey?
They
That's
go to
almost
Turkey.
a NATO country. I mean, it's an Islamic country. I mean, that's almost Western, right?
Almost.
Yeah, but not Western enough.
No. And so what they do is they'll take boats and go to Greece. And if you think about it, Greece, it's like, well, that country's a mess, but it's still better than Turkey. Probably, you know, economically is doing much better than Greece. But they'll leave Turkey to go to Greece, and no, they will not leave another Muslim country to go to another.
Yeah.
That should tell us a lot.
Pretty bad if you, you're going to Greece.
Yeah, that's right.
The land of the free. Let's go there. There's our future. Greece. Are you kidding me? I've never even heard of that before.
Just we don't want to spend too much time on this. I have a quote here from Matt Kenitzer. Speaking of this Muslim holiday, you said, Matt, as they do this, they will continue to lead the people of this country in the downgrade that we are in to full pluralistic democratic humanism under the guise of love, tolerance, and freedom of religion. Sadly, many Christians will support this. And of course, Tom Jones did vote in favor of this. I would like him to come in publicly and defend it. He said he has some reasons, but I would like to hear them publicly, not privately. So I would again encourage him to come in and explain why this is good for the state of Pennsylvania. Any final comments on this, Matt, before we move on? Full pluralistic democratic humanism. I mean, the more we do this, it's saying to Pennsylvanians, to this nation, there is no true standard. There is no higher law. I mean, whatever goes. Really, it is an attack ultimately on the Christian heritage of the nation. As many other religions as you can add, it dilutes the one true religion, as it were, and you no longer have any foundation for justice, for righteousness, for limits on the government, which we're going to talk about in a minute. So any final thoughts on this Muslim holiday and how Christians should think about whether or not we should have a Muslim holiday, and why we even need the state to vote on something like this is ridiculous. But
two things are grieving to me is one, you know, these people who hold office who would claim to follow Christ, is that they, you know, we just this past Sunday we went through Proverbs 8, you know, all about wisdom and what the voice of wisdom is, and they in those positions have an obligation to speak wisdom to these situations and to hate evil. And the implications of that on something like this, you know, if they are not doing that, if they are not faithfully proclaiming what is true, and it says in Proverbs 8:15, by me, by wisdom, kings reign and rulers decree what is just. By me, princes rule and nobles all who govern justly. So if there's a Christian in that position who's not doing what they're called to do, then the ramifications are massive. Especially one is the other grieving point is that then it translates to the church, to the Christian community, that you know, it encourages this kind of it's just a blend of a mess of pietism, of giving into syncretism, just this tolerance, acceptance to just go along with it. And act like it's valid, like it's true, like it's no big deal. And we've done that so much to the point where we, you know, the church, people who are in the pews, don't want to talk about this stuff, don't want to address it, and just kind of go on, oh, well, you know, you guys talk about this so much. Let's just stop talking about it. It's not a big deal. It's just a holiday and all of these things. But as we do that, and as we get tired of talking about these types of things, for one, it tells us that we don't recognize the problems in our society. Two, it's saying that we are now making peace with what's happening. We're okay with it. And are we really okay with that? I mean, Proverbs 8:13 says, the fear of the Lord is the hatred of evil. So it's all about my personal relationship with Christ. I may hate the evil myself. I may be opposed to that personally, but I'm just going to kind of keep it to myself. And it's just causing a whole lot of problems.
Yeah. You mentioned Proverbs 8. I want to read Psalm 2, the last 3 verses. Now, therefore, O kings, be wise, be warned, O rulers of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear and rejoice with trembling. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry and you perish in the way, for his wrath is quickly kindled. Blessed are all who take refuge in him. So, especially if you are someone claiming to be a Christian, to publicly approve of a pagan holiday in the spitting in the face of Christ, as it were, is a scary thing. Now, Representative Dave Zimmerman did not vote for this bill. Of course, I've had some words for Representative Zimmerman regarding Amos Miller, but I want to point out here that when in his statements against the bill, he says, there are many holidays within the religions, and he didn't want the state to go down the path of officially recognizing them all, which to me is, again, a very weak answer. Like, the answer should be, no, we're not going to recognize any anti-Christian holiday. Christ is Lord, and we only recognize him, and I will only recognize him if I claim to be a Christian. So I don't want to spend too much more time on that. We could do a whole episode, but the point is, it's very revealing, one, of those who voted for it, but even those who voted against it, they're like, well, I'm against this because it's just going to cause problems, not against it because Christ is Lord and he demands you to obey him in the civil sphere. Any other comments on that before we move on?
A quick word, Shak, you mentioned idolatry. Well, we don't do idolatry anymore. The new word is multiculturalism. That's the new word. And so if all this multiculturalism is good, then the more of it, the better, right? And then let's have a Taoist holiday, and maybe a whole week. Let's have Buddhist, Hindu.
Because we're inclusive, and that's right. A good thing.
And the more we include, the better off we are. Except that God says you do not go after other gods to serve them. Do not worship them. When you do, you provoke me to anger with the works of your hands, and I will do you no hurt if you will worship me. And then he goes on to say, if you continue to worship these other gods, then you're going to have to serve them too. And you think it's a problem serving me. Wait till you serve these false gods. And as pastors, Matt, me being a pastor, and you gentlemen, Christians for a long time, we all know that we cannot compromise on this point. Here is Christ talking to none other than the devil himself. Then Jesus said unto him, Get thee hence, Satan, for it is written, Thou shalt worship the Lord thy God, and him only shalt thou serve. Do we think we have options to worship other gods here? We don't. We never did. And Christ told Satan himself, you worship only one. And, it's like people are like, well, you're narrow-minded here. Well, no. Maybe depending what you see narrow-minded, but it's quite logical. If there's only one true God, then you should worship only one true God.
That's right.
Yeah, if we're going to talk about vocabulary, we're memorizing the book of Hosea.
Indeed we are. That's right. You are too, right?
Are.
Yes, I am. And the word that people won't like, in our culture, that is repeated for idolatry is whoring and whoredom.
Yeah, he did, and harlotry.
And harlotry. Yeah. The entire book is full of it
because it's spiritual adultery against God Himself.
Yeah, and so if we're going to use the correct vocabulary, we should call it whoredom.
Yeah, yeah.
This holiday, that's what it is.
Yeah, that's well said. Yeah, we and even Paul says that in the New Testament. Okay, I'm talking about marriage, but really, what I'm talking about the church and its relationship to Christ.
Yeah.
So that's not just the Old Testament. Go and found Hosea. Who reads that anymore, right? No, Paul says the exact same thing in the New Testament.
Well, hopefully Rep. Zimmerman can come around on Amos Miller and also on this and change his language and call this whoredom what it is, this spiritual idolatry, spiritual adultery. So speaking of serving false gods and setting up other gods, we have in America, the religion is statism. The state has become God. The state is our nanny, our daddy. It tells us what to do. It keeps us safe. It protects us. And once you bring in all these false religions, you dilute in the American mind the true religion, Christ as king, the truth of that, and you put in the place of Christ the state. And then all the other religions can exist underneath the state, and the state will be supreme. And we've seen that with the Amos Miller case, which now the state, just a brief update on that, now the state is suing Amos Miller in civil court, and they are the injured party. So they're the plaintiffs.
What?
Yeah, they're the plaintiffs going to the court, going to the judge and saying, look, Amos Miller has wronged us. He's done us harm by not following our rules, and will you please fine him? It's something like $1,000 for every offense of some man-made code, plus anything else the judge deems proper. So, I mean, this could be millions of dollars, and there's not one single person that's bringing a complaint against him who is actually harmed by Amos Miller, right? Wow. It's insanity. But the state can tell us what's safe to eat, right? The state can tell us how we can stay healthy. And so if we don't have the state, we would all get sick and die, right? We wouldn't know what to do. Eat mud from the side of the road,
no
drink
doubt.
water out of a ditch, and we would just be like Neanderthals here. I'm sorry, that's probably offensive to Neanderthals. But the thing is, we need the government to take care of us. So that's what we want to talk about now. We spent a lot of time on the food choices, food freedom. But it's not just that the government tells you, hey, here's what you need to do to eat. You need to get approval from us for your food choices. When you get sick, probably because of the government manipulation, then the state gets involved and says, well, we're going to tell you how to get better. And so that's what I want us to talk about now for the rest of this time, talk about the medical tyranny that takes place in this nation. And it's especially bad if you're a parent that has a child. If you're an adult, you at least have some freedom, although we saw a lot of that freedom erode during 2020. No, you're not allowed to take ivermectin or whatever. You don't have that freedom to treat this, whatever it is, the way that you see fit. But that's just getting worse and worse. So, Shak, I'd like you to share a little bit of your story. We talked about this before, so feel free to share as much as you'd like on your experience with the medical, industrial, tyrannical, statist complex.
Yeah. So in February of last year, beginning of March, I want to say, my son was diagnosed with a rare cancer called neuroblastoma. And of course, that was on the heels of what we had experienced with COVID. So we had lost all trust in the medical industry after that. So our experience was... I don't know if there's one word to describe it, but not pleasant, I would say. Not very pleasant. So when he got diagnosed, they just wanted to keep us in the hospital. They did not want us to leave. I kept trying to get my son out of there just so we can get second opinions. He was deteriorating in the hospital. Wouldn't let him sleep. Every 4 hours would check his pulse or whatever they do every 4 hours. And so we left after my wife was pregnant at the time, but a week later we left, and they still hadn't figured out what was wrong with him. So we told them, listen, we're out of here.
After all that poking and prodding,
all
and whatnot?
the poking and prodding, and every time they would say, here's why you should stay. Here is why you should stay. And I said, listen, we are going home. Call us when you find out what it is. And they did. We knew it was neuroblastoma before they did. I mean, a quick Google search, and I was like, this is what it is. So we got home, and it was, you need to do this, and you need to do that, and you need this. And so our fear was CPS. Mm-hmm. That was our fear.
Well, why was our fear? Yeah,
because if your son has a major disease like neuroblastoma, you have to follow what they tell you to do. Because if you don't, they would say, you're not being a good parent. We know better than you. So, and that's happened to people. And actually twice, doctors did mention CPS to me. I mean, I would argue with these doctors every time I got the chance, but
So there's medical guidelines that have been dictated by, is the government involved in this?
Yes, the protocol. Of course they are.
The protocol.
Yeah, the protocol.
So the government has put in place these protocols, no doubt influenced, I would imagine, by the big medical industries, the pharmaceutical companies, right? So that you mentioned, they don't want you to leave the hospital. I wonder why. The longer you're in there and the more steps you go through, of course, the more money they will get. And so you have to follow these pharmaceutical, big pharma, big medical protocols. And if you don't, you're basically threatened with they'll take your children from you.
Yes.
So wait a minute. You're dealing with how old was your son at the time?
3.
He was 3. Okay, so you're dealing with a 3-year-old with cancer. Then you have this new thing, kind of like vaguely child CPS hanging over your head. If you do something that's not according to some protocol written by someone who's never seen your son, or frankly can't care because they can't know.
Yeah.
So not only the cancer bad enough. Now you have to negotiate, or however you want to say it, around people vaguely threatening you with taking Christian away from you.
Yeah,
I mean, is that how it was?
I mean, to some degree, yes. But they also use the COVID tactic, which is, do you want your son to die? That was the tactic they used. They said that all the time to me. I want to go home. I don't think this is.
Wait, I never thought of this before.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. The only way I can live is if I stay here.
Right.
And if I go home, it must be because I want him to die.
Right.
Let's say my wife birthed him, nursed him. You've changed hundreds of diapers by now, right? But you have no interest in him living. If you leave, you want him to die.
Right.
Is that maddening?
Well, and they would give you the percentages, just like COVID. Like, it's very unlikely, but you don't want to take that chance. It's like, I could drive the car and get into an accident. I mean,
Joel and Matt, if you want to, I want to build on that, and then we'll come back to you, Shak, to continue going here. But that's a point that I think we need to drive home, because when we've spoken with some of these pastors, even here in the county, they still have this idea that the government is looking out for our best interests. And I mean, here's a perfect case. Like, how can you consistently have that view when it's the same civil government, probably the same hospital that would say, okay, well, if you're here and you're pregnant and you want to get an abortion, yeah, we'll tell you where to go to get that. You can take care of that. You can, butcher your baby. But yeah, we're supposed to believe that they have the best interest of our children in mind. I mean, there's some serious cognitive dissonance there, that because there are people that are going to want to say, well, they're just looking out for the best interest for your child, Shak. Like, obviously, believe the best. These people just want to help you. And I'm sure there's some great people there. But again, once you have the government get involved with these big companies, does Big Pharma care about the life of one child? Right? Does the government care about your child more than you do? And for people to, and especially pastors, to promote that in the face of government endorsed abortion is just insane to me.
Yeah, our problem, Matt, you touched on a little bit earlier here. We've grown to be at peace with horrible wickedness, and we have grown to be at peace with abortion. That's the only way we will ever listen to these people. Like, talk to Shak, like, we're more concerned about your baby than you are. Yeah. That's really what they're saying. You don't have the capability to be concerned about your son. We do, though, right? And the only way that could happen is we would have already made peace with abortion. Yeah. Otherwise, we'd be shouting about it. We'd be saying, wait a second, you're talking to me about my health and my baby's health? Let's talk about the baby's health that you guys are killing over there with the DNC or that saline solution going on over there. But oh no, we've grown at peace with it. And so then the next thing we're able to do is that, yeah, I believe that you can split those up, to your point, Chris, right? Yeah, you can support the baby's life in this room, and you can kill the baby over there.
And then you can mutilate the kids over in the other room that are 8 years old.
Yeah. You can cut off their body parts over there.
Same hospitals that do that very thing, advocate and push for it, are the ones that we are supposed to listen to.
And the pulpits have made peace with it all.
But stop talking about politics.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah. You can't,
like, seriously,
you can't do that.
That's the Christian community. Stop talking about that stuff.
Yeah. So at what point, though, Matt?
And these are the same people. Sorry, Chris.
No, go ahead.
These are the same people that are all uptight about slavery 150 years ago. The pulpit should have spoken up. Well, wasn't that politics then?
Exactly. That's right. At what point does the larger government gets, and the more areas their tentacles reach into, everything's politics.
Well, I brought that up 2 weeks ago when I talked about, when I was bringing this up, I alluded to it being an octopus. And it's got its tentacles in every nook and cranny.
If only it had 8.
And right. I was being nice, I guess, maybe. But to think about it is that, like, healthcare, education, these things are not political. they are pre-political realities given by God for the family, for the church, all of these types of things. They're not political, but we've given into and let them marinate and live under the political category. And so then it's gotten so big, as you just mentioned, Chris, that now we don't want to talk about it. Because we have all of these problems, but we don't want to address them. We think that our, relationship with Christ is just personal, secret, at home, by yourself. And it doesn't touch every area of life. And so we give the civil area a pass, and we just kind of go on with the rest of our life and just kind of give in to whatever is going on. And we are said to trust these people, all of that type of stuff. And it's just, we need to stop thinking about that. We need to start putting it in the right categories. Like education needs to be in the category of the family and the church. Healthcare needs to be a family, church. It needs to be in that category. It's not a political thing. And when we bring down the government to where it's supposed to be,
political. That wasn't us. All we were trying to do is educate our children and maybe make a few choices about what we want to eat and where we want to support our children. And then all of a sudden, next thing you know, we're breaking some. Maybe commandment number 5,286,354, right? You're breaking that command.
Yeah. It was hard to trust them when they walked in 2023 with a mask on. It was just very difficult to take them seriously. Yeah. And I'm not saying, there's nothing that they say is true, but I think Chris had said it in an earlier podcast. Discernment is not knowing right from wrong. It's knowing right from almost right. And that's kind of where we are here with the medical industry. Of course, they have things right. They've done good things, but I don't know who to trust. We need to, as parents, do our own research. We need to ask other people, Christian doctors, and see what their opinion is. I'm not just going to trust you because you have a PhD.
And you hit on something important, I think, is the responsibility. We as parents have the responsibility, but I think in gradual ways, we just have given over our responsibility, whether intentional or not, or whatever. But we've done that so much in so many areas. We've given over it to this growing nanny state that we then don't even think about it. And now we have this kind of comfort in our life that we like, and we don't want to disrupt. So then we just keep giving our responsibility over little by little by little, and we just go along with it.
Yeah. So I've said before, and I'm sure you would agree, Joel. You've spoken more about the government schools than I have, but that's where it starts. If you give your kids over to the state to raise them, and the state's going to say, "Okay, well, we'll take it from here." And that's where the American people have given over responsibility. If you've done that, if you've done that, everything else kind of falls in place. If you're willing to give your children to the state, then why not let the state make your food choices, your health choices, and so on and so forth. But I want to come back to you, Shak, and continue this, because this was a case where, again, we've said it before many times, you add all these man-made regulations, these man-made laws. Now, you are someone here who is trying to take care of your son. You are following God's law, and yet really you're in fear, in a sense, of, well, if I don't do this the way the state wants me to, they might take my son from me.
That's right. And a couple examples were this. The one time we were in the hospital, he needed a blood transfusion, and he had gotten a transfusion before, and he got a fever from it, and so he was getting another blood transfusion, and he got a fever. And at this point, if you get a fever, you have to stay in the hospital for I don't know how long. And so after fighting with them for about 2-3 hours,
I was there.
He was there. I gave in because they would just not let me leave. And so I said, listen, all right, I'm going to stay here for 2 days and that's it. And every day I would argue with them. On the second day, the doctor was telling me what's going on. And I said, do I have any say in my kid's life? And any say? And he said, well, yeah, if you decide today you want to take him home, it's not like we would call CPS on something like that. And there it was, a little hint for you, Shak. Some things are allowed, some are not. This one was, we'll let it slide. And that same doctor, what
a guy.
Yeah, and I said to him, listen, why don't we just stay here for this whole year? if it's so dangerous to leave this hospital? Why won't you? Well, he said, well, it's the numbers and things like that. Yeah, your son's case right now, it's not so bad, but there's, and I think subconsciously he said it. There are rooms here. And I said, and I responded to him, I said, okay, so if there weren't rooms here, I would be home. And he kind of was like, well, no answer. And just indications like this is you don't actually use the science that you say you're using. This is not science anymore if you're not going to go by statistics and probabilities and all that. And so that was one example. Another was blood transfusions themselves. We said, listen, if we want to do blood transfusions, we do not want random blood. We want blood from sources we know. Mm-hmm. And my mother-in-law worked tirelessly to get things set up. And there was people ready to donate blood. And I get a phone call one day, and essentially, the phone call was maybe a half hour of me yelling at this person, but essentially it was, we're just not going to do it because we just don't want to do it. It's too much. We don't want to do it. So they force you to, to do their procedures or whatever, because chemo requires blood transfusions. You can't do chemo without blood transfusions, and they won't even let you do it the way. And what's funny is they make you sign paperwork before a blood transfusion. Hey, do you consent to? It's like, is this a joke?
What choice do you have?
Is this a joke? If I said no, you would give them the blood transfusion anyway. This is a joke.
Wow. Oh, wow. And not only do you have that where they're basically just steamrolling you, hey, we're going to do it our way, whether you like it or not. There's probably other things, and there's been many people with cancer and other illnesses that there's treatment they do want that the government also says is illegal. Mm-hmm. So it's not only, hey, you have to do it our way, but even if you wanted to do other stuff, and some people probably have gone around the law and said, well, we're going to do it anyway, but you have the government just complete control, tyranny on the medical industry.
Well,
and why is that?
Let me ask you a question here. Did they suspect that since you wanted blood from sources that you knew, that you might have been like really committing the ultimate sin? Maybe you were going for blood from people that weren't vaccinated, and they sniffed that out, and oh no, you're not. What could that be?
I'm convinced of that. I am convinced of that. I am. I think they were like, who do you think you are? Knowing better. Of course, the vaccines don't harm no one, and we're not going to let you, think that way. I'm convinced. So
you had to
of
learn a lesson.
Yeah, I am convinced of that.
Oh wow. Okay, so telling you what you need to do, preventing you from seeking alternative treatments, really completely controlling the whole process. I mean, I said you live in fear because that's what the statists want to do. I do want to say you and your wife had a wonderful attitude through the whole process, even though there was great injustice there. But my point was simply, this is what happens when you have man-made law. You have the righteous never knowing, what the state's going to do against them, and that's not the way it's supposed to be. God's law is a beautiful thing. You can live in liberty. You have freedom to follow his law and seek to protect your children, to get them the healing they need, and so on and so forth. So, anything else you want to share from that experience as it went on? I
would like to say that through it all, we saw God's working hand in the entire process, and again, we're not saying we were not going to do anything the medical industry was recommending.
You're not saying you would have rejected all of it.
Right.
You simply wanted to be able to make your own choices within the options they presented.
Yes, and there was two options, because every hospital in the entire United States follows one protocol. And the hospital we went to, which is up in New York, has a different, less chemo. They do it a little different. We were, between these two options, we were like, we definitely want that one. And it was just an answer to prayer, I want to say, throughout the whole thing. And I'm so thankful for my wife throughout this whole thing, because she really did the research and she studied. She would listen to all kinds of podcasts. I mean, I was doing some studying, but not like her. I mean, she was dedicated, definitely more dedicated than all the nurses and the doctors towards my son. I'm not saying, that those people are not.
Well, how could they be? How could they be more dedicated
Yes.
than the child's mother? And that's the point here.
Yeah,
But they're the
and-
ones that can make the choice.
Yes, and she had just, by the way, my wife had given birth 2 days before his diagnosis. So she was on top of it, and praise the Lord for her, because then we started seeing prayers being answered, and so I just want to say that in spite of this, God's hand, we could see that God is working through this situation.
And we'll tie up some loose ends here and just bring in some more commentary. But can you let our listeners know? I mean, I know this is, I think, a nice thing to share how Christian's doing now.
Yeah, he's doing wonderfully now. He's been, I want to say, cancer-free for 3-4 months now. So praise the Lord for that. We still have to go to the hospital for some things. He's done with the chemo and all that, but he is doing fantastically well, thanks to the prayers of all the prayer warriors. I was telling Matt today, he said, we were praying for you. And I was like, that was the best thing I could hear when people say, we're praying for your son. People that I didn't even knew were thinking about us, were praying for us. So thanks to men like Matt and our wonderful church that kept praying for us, and he's doing great right now.
Awesome. Praise the Lord. Think about any other thoughts you want to share from that. Joel, anything you want to bring in here on this idea of the government? And I know some people say, well, look, Christian, it turned out fine, so the government always knows what they're doing. But obviously, there are a lot of these cases where people are doing things that the government doesn't know about, and to be frank, some of them don't want to share it because then the government might get on their case. So, people have to kind of fly under the radar and say, okay, how can I treat this without the government knowing, because they don't want me to be independent ultimately of the nanny state. I mean, and that's one of the things, I think there are, we've seen this with COVID, with other things. The government does not want, at least Big Pharma. Why would Big Pharma want there to be a cure to any number of diseases? Right, and that's why you have then regulations come in. It protects these big companies because if you were able to cure any of these things, well, then there goes all their profit. So the government does not want us to have the freedom to make our own food choices. They don't want us to have the freedom to make our own health choices. And that's really how these tie together. It's the nanny state telling you how to live your life, and it's tyranny. And we speak of this often. It always terminates in tyranny when you reject God's word, because now you no longer have limits on what the state can do. So, Joel, any thoughts on this tyranny, this nanny state, and basically the regulation of our lives, and how we came to this point?
Yeah, I'm going to try to explain something, and I'm going to depend on you guys, you gentlemen, if I'm not clear. There's so much thoughts in my head here, and I'm afraid it's going to tumble out incoherently. So I'm going to do my best. The nanny state comes along and says, like Satan, I will give you privileges without responsibility. And we see all throughout the scriptures that every time you see a privilege, you see a corresponding responsibility every single time. You, Adam and Eve, you want to be here in the garden? You got a responsibility. And this is pretty simple back then. Just don't eat from that tree. That's all you have to do. Satan comes along and essentially tells them, the serpent, you know what? You don't need to be responsible, and you'll still have the privileges. The state does that, and what happens with your case with Christian, if they give you bad advice with your son, they're not responsible. They're not. Mm-hmm. They have the privilege of telling you what to do and have no responsibility whatsoever. And this is sweeping our land. I was talking to a businessman yesterday. He said, I cannot find, he works in construction. He said, I can't find people under 35 that want to work. And it's because they're entitled, and entitled people do not understand responsibility. Mm-hmm. Another quick example here. When I was in the concrete business, I got into it with one of my managers one day, and we were talking about the state inspectors. Now, when I got into concrete, I thought concrete state inspectors worked. Silly me. I found out that the heaviest thing they pick up all day is a clipboard. That's it. And they watch you work. You see, when I got in the concrete business, I had to learn how to test the concrete. They ain't testing it. I'm testing it. So my company has to pay me to do their work for them in addition to all the taxes that were already piled up on, right? So I had to do all these tests and stuff and slump and air content and all this kind of stuff. That's concrete talk. Anyway, okay, so I got into it with my manager one day, my operations manager, and I said, no more. No more state inspectors. None. And of course, he gave me the statist response, right? Well, if we didn't have the state inspectors, there'd be terrible concrete contractors out there. I said, oh, good. There's no terrible concrete contractors out there now, right? But they're the guys that aren't really doing so well in business. And I said to him, and here's the thing. If things go south on a job, the state inspectors were there, they're not getting in trouble. I'll tell you who's getting in trouble: the people who manufacture the concrete, the people who place it, the people who finished it. Even with the inspectors right there. Well, shortly thereafter, it's not remembered well now, but the Yankee Stadium was built. It was a new stadium, and there were problems with the concrete. And man, I mean, the politicians were talking. We're going to go after the manufacturer. We're going to hold those responsible, right? Well, this is New York City. You can't walk without bumping into 3 or 4 inspectors of something, right? And no one ever said one single thing about the inspector failures. Not one. It was all the private people that made it. And I brought that right back up to my operation manager. I said, see, this is the thing. Yeah, they have the privilege, they don't have the responsibility. And we see that with the idol worshipers. We want God to bless us here, but we want to be irresponsible and worship other gods and be idolatrous here. And God says, I'm not going to let you get away with that. And behind it all is this temptation to have privileges without responsibility, and it's godless, wicked, and deadly. Hosea 4:2. 4:1 and 2. Hear the word of the Lord, ye children of Israel, for the Lord has a controversy with the inhabitants of the land, because there's no truth, nor mercy, nor knowledge of God in the land. And then he says this: by swearing and lying and killing and stealing and committing adultery, they break out, and blood touches blood. We'd like to have the privilege of committing adultery. We're not really so big on killing and stealing. We'd like to think that we can commit adultery and attack God's laws that way, and we'll be okay. And God says, no. You mess with my law word here. There's going to be stealing and killing and blood touching blood here. Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's have the privilege. Let's not have the responsibility. Can't work. But that, Chris, is the message of the state, and that's what they're doing to Amos Miller. We want the privilege, and every businessman. They want the privilege of profiting off businesses. They'll tax them. They have no responsibility whatsoever in making the decisions about hiring, about firing, about investing. They have no skin in that game, but they're there to take the money. Privilege without responsibility.
So you lost the argument with your operation manager, or did you win?
No, I swept all before me. It was too easy. It was too easy because he knew they weren't saying a thing about the inspectors.
Yeah.
Okay, so anything else you want to add there, or did you get everything?
Did you get enough?
I think I took everybody else's time.
So yeah, the state, when people die in the care of the medical industry, I mean, yeah, of course you have some of these lawsuits, but overall they say, well, we followed the protocol. There's nothing we can do. And then if someone goes outside that at all, and then, well, it's your fault now, this child died. What about going overseas? I know that I've known people who went to Germany, to Mexico, to seek treatment. And once again, I mean, let's just start there for a minute with the adults. I think there was a problem that you had with your son, but adults who want to travel overseas, they go to these different countries to seek treatment that is illegal in America. Why? Why do we not have the freedom in America to seek X treatment for cancer?
Yeah.
I mean, it's got to be because, these big pharmaceutical companies and these bureaucrats who are making these laws say, well, no, either that's going to hurt our profit, or you don't have the freedom to make that decision. But what did you run into when you were looking into some of these options overseas or in Mexico for treatment for your son?
Yes, all of them said we don't treat children. The ones we called. They said, we do not treat children. And I think it is because, I mean, it is a bigger responsibility, children. I understand that. But I think there is fear there from the U.S., I think. I think they were scared. I emailed some guys that wouldn't even respond to me. I told them my son, this hospitals or clinics that were organic or, I forget the term of different treatment. And, what's the term, Chris? The other type alternative.
Okay.
The alternative treatment. And they wouldn't even respond to me.
Okay.
So we tried, but that was not an avenue that we could take.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think they do treat Mexican children, but to bring in another child, they probably are afraid of the legal ramifications. We've created this society of litigation. Mm-hmm. Matt, any thoughts you want to add on this idea, and especially, again, I mean, how our religious worldview infiltrates every area of life. And here we have, once again, where people say, well, you guys shouldn't focus on this. I know you just brought this up, but, Shak's here trying to raise his family, take care of his children, and the religious worldview of the nation is preventing him from doing that with freedom, right? Under God's law. How can I help my son? And that's why this matters. I mean, it touches every area of life. So any other thoughts on the government regulating what we eat, how we get better, cradle to grave care, basically?
Yeah, I really wonder if Christians want a cultural reformation. I think we, just by confession or profession, we say that we recognize the problems in our society, like things like this. Oh, yeah, that's not right. Or abortion, yeah, that's not right. Or, this shouldn't be happening. This shouldn't be happening. These shouldn't be in place. But I don't know if Christians really want a cultural reformation, because we're not getting to the root questions of, I brought this up before, and probably I think on this podcast before, is like, for instance, government schools. Should that even be a thing? Should the government be in healthcare, making all of these protocols and all of that? Should that even be a thing? Should, getting punished for speeding, should that even be a thing? Like, I don't think we're asking those questions, and it shows that I just really wonder that if Christians really want things to change.
Yeah.
And I don't think we do.
Yeah.
And what would we do with a cultural reformation if it smacked us in the face?
Well, and that's the other problem that we have to sift through, because then you get the objection so many times when we talk about this stuff. Oh, you guys are just complaining. You got to stop talking about it. Stop complaining. Give solutions. Well, first of all, again,
translation: the problems are only with my neighbor. They haven't reached me yet.
Well, and even just again going to those questions, like, that's the start of figuring out solutions. When you get on the topic of a government school, should it even be a thing? If you say no, okay, now we got a biblical answer. Let's figure out some solutions. Let's start trying to implement change. How do we deal with this? But I just don't think that we want to do that.
It reminds me, you say that, Matt, of Elijah. The brook runs out. He's going into, God tells him, go to Jezreel, I think, and you find a widow there, and she's going to feed you. And he says, what are you doing? And she's like, well, I think she was picking up sticks. I'm going to pick up sticks, cook them, and me and my son are going to die. And I think that's the Christian, they knew why there was a famine in the land. That widow knew what was going on. It was idolatry. It was that wicked king Ahab and his ridiculous wife, that disgusting wife of his. And she just all right with it, because bad guys are just going to do bad things, and that's she was just going to cook some sticks and die. And Elijah helps her out, and then her son does die, and all of a sudden now she's complaining. Now it's God should only do good things. You know, I knew why I was going to die before, but now it's like you're about to, you know, have bark for dinner and kick it, and now you're whining. You know, but I think that's how we are as Christians. Oh, well, of course the government is going to do bad things. That's just who they are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I think you're correct. And I think, I mean, to a point, we do recognize what's going on, but we don't want to do anything about it. And we don't want to turn the world right side up. We don't want the world looking at us like, oh, you're turning the world upside down. You're saying that Jesus is king, and we have to obey all of this stuff. I've been kind of thinking about that, and kind of connects to what you were just talking about, Shak, where in First Kings 18, 17, and 18, when Ahab saw Elijah, Ahab said to him, "Is it you troubler of Israel?" Then he answered, "I have not troubled Israel, but you have in your father's house, because you have abandoned the commandments of the Lord and followed the Baals." I don't think we want to be troublers of Israel. I think we want to just kind of ride the wave, be comfortable, not have the responsibilities, get things for free. And I don't think we want to stir things up to make change. Mm-hmm. And that's just so wrong.
Shak, I want to come to you again here at the end. We're running out of time. But first, Joel, I don't know if you got to it. You had mentioned something about maybe it's too late at this point, but to stop the tyranny when it starts, it might be too late for that here in America. Doesn't mean we give up. It means we have to say, okay, something's going to happen here. We need to lay the foundation for our children's children and keep going on. But it would have been nice if our forefathers had said, wait a minute, things are getting out of hand back then. You know, we're letting the government do things that God never authorized it to do. And now at this point, we are dealing with the wicked expanse of tyrannical government. So was there a comment you wanted to make on that?
I was doing some reading on the War for Independence and the problems surrounding that, of course, starting with the Stamp Act. And there was a great, which was basically around 1765, 1766, approximately 10 years before the actual breakout of hostilities. And what happened is the British Parliament said, we need to pay for now this is classic. We need to pay for the 7 Years' War, or French and Indian War, if you will. And we did it to protect you.
Right.
So we're going to squeeze the money out of you. All right. This is an old song being played here, right? It's for your benefit, Shak. It's all for your benefit. All these rules for your benefit, Shak, and for your son, right? So, and the colonists are complaining. They're saying people are going to go out of business. This is wrong. And I mean, they're doing some admittedly violent stuff. Tar and feathering revenue officer. I mean, I know a little bit about, I've never been that, obviously, but I've read about it. It's a pretty horrible experience. It's awful. All right. So then Parliament backs off the Stamp Act, and then they come up later on with the Revenue Act. And when they back off the Stamp Act, we say, okay, we're backing off the Stamp Act, but we still reserve the right to tax your lights out whenever we want to. Then they come up with the Revenue Act, and that's a problem as well. Well, I wanted to just reference this a little bit. This guy writing to his brother, when all this is going on, they closed down the Boston port, and now they have to get their goods overland because Boston is shut down because of the Tea Party, right? The British government's trying to squeeze their lights out, right? Try to get them to say uncle, right? No different from what they're doing with Amos Miller. Not a bit different at all. So anyway, so they're getting their goods overland. It's raising the price of their goods, right? And this guy writing to his brother says this. He says, when I seriously reflect on the unhappy situation we are in, I can't help but be uneasy lest the whole trade of the town should never be reinstated again. But on the other hand, it's bad. It's costing me. It's painful. But on the other hand, consider that our future welfare depends altogether upon a steady and firm adherence to the common cause. He's thinking down the road. He's thinking the future, and we've got to think that way. What about our children? This creeping statism. Oh, it's just Amos Miller. To your point, Matt, it's just What are you all worried about Amos Miller for? Well, the colonists understood the problems. They understood it wasn't going to stop with the Stamp Act. It wasn't going to stop with the Revenue Act. They were going to keep doing it. And they are doing it now. And I wish we could learn from people who've gone before us that understand creeping statism. Or just creeps.
Yeah, well, that's it's the nanny state in the medical field. Anything else, Shak, you want to add on your experience on the state as God telling you how to take care of your son?
We had wonderful doctors, too, throughout this whole process as well. Wonderful nurses. We're not saying the entire medical industry can't trust any of them. We did have some good people. There are good doctors that I called. Dr. Wheeler was one of the doctors I called when we first started. There are great doctors, wonderful people, but our experience was they don't allow us to be parents. They don't allow us to decide what we want to do for the benefit of our son. And that's unbiblical. It just is.
And the doctors, they would say, some of them maybe would want to, but they'd say, well, our hands are tied.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was going to say, Chris. Even those good doctors, their hands are tied.
And why are they tied? It's the same thing we heard from the judge recently. Well, I can't do anything different. The legislative branch, they made a law. Mm-hmm. They made a regulation. I can't do anything now. Right? My hands are tied. Even if I know that this is going to help your son, I can't do anything differently because the law of the Lord of the land, the statist legislator said. And that's the thing with God's law. You'll never be in that position where you have to say, well, I have to obey God's law, and that means harm is going to, no. That's the beauty of God's law. It's concise, it's simple, but now you add all these things, and whether it's under the guise of regulations or codes, the doctors, some of the magistrates, well, I can't do anything about it. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that. I'm glad you mentioned that. There are great doctors there. Some of them even certainly defy some of these things when they can. Yeah. And they're probably not working in the hospitals anymore.
Yeah, the doctor that we work with now, he's been great. And he has, again, there are no doctors that I did not argue with.
Okay.
So I argued with all of them, the good ones as well, But he did do some things that he told me no one else has ever done this. There was one thing he said, we're sending you home. We've never done this, But I guess it's easier than arguing with me all night,
Okay.
So
advocate for your children like Shak. Argue with these doctors.
Yes, just we just wanted to know why, any medication they were giving him, we wanted to know what it is and what it does and why he needs it, But of course, sometimes
you weren't going to accept, well, it's just protocol.
No, I was not going to accept that.
Right.
That was a curse word to my ear. Right. I would always answer back, he is not a protocol. He is my son, and I want you to treat him as him. Christian, right there. What does he need? Not the protocol,
right.
And so, again, even though we did, our experience wasn't pleasant, but praise the Lord, he answered all our prayers, I want to say, really. It seemed like 15 minutes before we had to make a decision, something would happen. And it's like, well, there you go. So it was praise the Lord for his goodness to us throughout this entire process.
These issues are going to continue, and we can't be discouraged and give up. We also have to realize these are some of the challenges we're facing, and there are good people in these systems, and I think that's part of the issue too. People need to eventually say, you know what, well, I'm going to defy these unbiblical, unjust mandates, and actually seek to help people. And we need more of that. And I think the more trust erodes with the medical industry, with the government telling us what to eat, I hope people will wake up, Christians will wake up and say, you know what, we actually do want the responsibility that God has called us to take for ourselves. So,
can I touch on that real quick? And I think our responsibility as things are crumbling around us is to build, is to separate from these places, whatever they may be, and then build ourselves. build healthcare situations, build schools, build whatever, as things are crumbling and this land is deteriorating, as we find ourselves in this kind of captivity that I think about a lot. Then Jeremiah is like, you seek the welfare of the land that you're in. You build, you create, and as they're crumbling, then as everything's gone, what's going to be standing?
Right.
What are the Christians going to be doing? Hopefully, we're going to be building.
Yeah, and to bring it back to Amos Miller briefly, and that's one of the things that I forget who said it to me, that the Amish are trying to do some of that with some of their health clinics. And I don't know if it was Amos who said this or not to me, but that's what this is about too. Like if the government comes in and can control Amos' food, what people eat, they're not going to allow the Amish to have a medical clinic outside of government control, and they're going to approach it and say, well, no, this is not safe. And again, the absurdity that this is the government that's butchering babies, that's mutilating children, they're going to tell us what is safe and what's good for our health. So that's why we do need to push back. It will continue on. And Shak, we appreciate your example. And I know there are parents that deal with this, and some people listening might have gone through it or might have to go through it in the future. And so your example and your willingness to stand for your son is a great example. Joel, anything else you want to add?
One quick thing about Amos Miller here. I was again reading about the whole war for independence and so forth, and the problems from that guy who's writing during the time letters to his brother. He says this, and I couldn't help but think of Amos Miller. He says, I wrote to you recently by one Mr. Marshall of your place, which I was safe to hand, which I wish safe to hand, as it contains matters that I should be sorry if you don't let you know. If I remember right, one paragraph mentioned wagons being rifled of 4 firelocks or being stolen, right, by soldiers, right? And he goes on to say, but they weren't really sure, the soldiers weren't really sure. He says, as it might, if they should keep the firelock. Okay, this is a time of hostilities. Not really sure if we should keep the weapon, the 4 rifles, as it might be considered as a military robbery. In other words, the soldiers were saying, I don't know. Yeah, we might get brought up on charges of stealing stuff. But now today, bureaucrats walk right into Amos Miller's place of business and carry off his stuff without a worry of whether or not that's robbing the man.
The thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And when Amos Miller said, I don't want you to steal from me anymore, they're here to murder, they're here to kill and destroy. When you don't allow a man to work, to feed his family, you are here to kill and to destroy. And we need to stand up with guys like Amos Miller, because they're coming to kill.
No, they're going to stop with Amos.
Kill,
they're all
destroy.
done. They're all done with Amos.
Yep.
They're going to let us alone, don't you know?
Yep. So
come on.
We need to stand up for men like Amos Miller, because the tyranny will not stop.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for coming in, Shak. Thanks for coming back, Matt and Joel. Appreciate it. For more information about the Lancaster Patriot, go to thelancasterpatriot.com. Until next time, remember that Christ, not man, is king. So long.